The mahogany conference table gleamed under the law office's recessed lighting as my mother, Diana Parker, spread out what she claimed was my grandfather's only will. Her diamond rings caught the light as she gestured dramatically, ever the grieving daughter putting on a show. My name is Julia Morgan, and at 29, I was watching my mother try to steal my inheritance through the oldest trick in the book, a conveniently discovered will that left everything to her. It's quite clear, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Dad left everything to me, his only daughter. I'm sure he had his reasons for excluding you, Julia. I studied my mother's face, still beautiful at 50, thanks to regular visits to her plastic surgeon. She'd always been good at appearances, at making things look exactly the way she wanted them to. But this time she made a crucial mistake. Mrs. Parker, the family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, said carefully, this will appears to be properly executed. However, given that Mr. Morgan was known for his meticulous nature, it seems unusual that he would have changed his estate plan so dramatically without informing me. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Dad became very private in his final years. You know how the elderly can be, paranoid, secretive. He simply didn't trust lawyers anymore. I almost smiled at that. My grandfather, Jonathan Morgan, had built his fortune through careful legal maneuvering and strategic business deals. The idea that he'd suddenly developed a distrust of lawyers was absurd. But I kept quiet, remembering what I found 3 days ago while clearing out his study. It had started with a loose floorboard, something I might never have noticed if I hadn't dropped my phone and watched it slide under his massive oak desk. When I moved the Persian rug to retrieve it, I heard the hollow sound of my footstep. The hidden compartment beneath the floorboard contained exactly what I'd expected my grandfather to have, a backup plan. Documents, photos, and a USB drive that told a very different story than the one my mother was currently selling. Julia, Mr. Harrison's voice brought me back to the present. Do you have any objections to this will? I met my mother's eyes across the table. She was trying to hide it, but I could see the triumph there. She thought she'd won. Not at the moment, I said quietly. I'd like time to process this. My mother's smile widened slightly. Of course, darling. Take all the time you need, though you should probably start looking for a new apartment. The rent on grandfather's penthouse must be quite expensive without his monthly allowance. The dig was deliberate. She knew I'd been living in grandfather's Manhattan penthouse while finishing my MBA. What she didn't know was that he'd already transferred the deed to my name 6 months ago. I left the law office with my mother's words ringing in my ears. She'd always been like this, using money as a weapon, trying to control everyone around her through financial manipulation. It's why she'd married my father, a wealthy businessman who died under mysterious circumstances when I was 5. It's why she'd spent years trying to convince my grandfather that I was irresponsible, untrustworthy, unworthy of his fortune. But my grandfather had seen through her. Back at the penthouse, I went straight to my home office and opened the wall safe behind a Monet reproduction. Inside was everything I found in grandfather's study. The USB drive contained years of correspondence between my grandfather and his private investigators. He'd been watching my mother, documenting everything, her secret bank accounts, her offshore investments, her connections to my father's death. My dear Julia, his final email to me was dated just 2 weeks before his death. If you're reading this, then things have played out exactly as I expected. Diana will try to claim everything, probably with a forged will. Let her think she's won. The truth has a way of emerging at exactly the right moment. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust with this, James Chen, my grandfather's former head of security and my godfather. It's happening exactly like he said it would, I told him when he answered. Are you ready? James asked. His voice was steady, calming, just like it had been when he taught me self-defense as a teenager. Almost. I just need to confirm one thing. Can you meet me at the old storage facility tomorrow? The storage facility had been my grandfather's secret archive, a place where he kept records of every business deal, every transaction, every piece of evidence he might someday need. My mother didn't know it existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's last days, how he called me to his study and made me promise to be patient, to be smart, to be stronger than the greed that had poisoned our family. Your mother, he'd said, his voice weak but his mind still sharp, sees money as power. But real power comes from knowing when to wait, when to watch, and when to act. The next morning, I met James at the storage facility. He was already there, his silver hair neat as always, his posture military straight despite his age. Unit 47, he said, leading the way through the climate-controlled corridors. Your grandfather kept everything about Diana there. The unit was small but organized with military precision. Boxes labeled by year, files color-coded by subject. And there, in a fireproof safe at the back, was what we were looking for. The original will, James said as I pulled it out, along with evidence of every attempt Diana made to alter it over the past 5 years. I opened the document carefully. Unlike the will my mother had produced, this one was witnessed by multiple people, including James and Mr. Harrison. It left the bulk of the estate to me, with specific provisions about preserving the family's charitable foundation, the same foundation my mother had been trying to dissolve. But more importantly, it contained a letter addressed to my mother. Diana. It began in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've done exactly what I knew you would. You've tried to steal what was never meant to be yours. Just like you tried to steal Robert's fortune by arranging his accident. Robert, my father. I felt my hands shake as I read the next lines. I have protected Julia from your manipulations, your lies, your greed. Everything you've done, every scheme, every theft, every betrayal, has been documented. If you contest this will, if you try to interfere with Julia's inheritance in any way, all of it will come to light. There was more. Bank records showing how she'd embezzled from my father's company before his death, photos proving she'd been involved with a mechanic who tampered with his car, evidence that she'd tried to bribe my grandfather's doctors to declare him mentally incompetent. Your grandfather, James said softly, spent the last 10 years of his life building a case against her. He knew she'd make her move when he died. He wanted to make sure you were protected. I gathered everything carefully, placing it in my briefcase. Does Mr. Harrison know about this? James nodded. He has copies of everything. He's been waiting for you to find it, to understand what needs to be done. As we left the storage facility, I thought about my mother sitting in her expensive house, probably already planning how to spend what she thought was her inheritance. She had no idea what was coming. When do you want to do this? James asked as we reached my car. I checked my watch. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I think that would be the perfect time to show my mother exactly what her greed has cost her. James smiled grimly. Your grandfather would be proud. You're exactly what he knew you'd be, patient, smart, and stronger than Diana ever imagined. I drove home with the evidence safely beside me, thinking about everything that would happen tomorrow. My mother thought she was playing a simple game of forged documents and false claims. She had no idea she was walking into a trap 20 years in the making. The real game was just beginning. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit, my grandfather's favorite color, and made my way to Mr. Harrison's office. My briefcase felt heavy with the weight of 2 decades of evidence. My mother was already there when I arrived, wearing black Chanel and a practiced expression of grief. 2 of her friends, fellow socialites who'd never actually met my grandfather, sat with her, providing what she probably thought was tactical support. Julia, darling, she said, air-kissing my cheek. I hope you've come to terms with everything. Your grandfather made his wishes quite clear. I took my seat across from her, noting how Mr. Harrison carefully avoided her gaze as he organized his papers. James sat quietly in the corner, his presence making my mother slightly nervous, though she tried not to show it. Shall we begin? Mr. Harrison asked, adjusting his glasses. Mrs. Parker has provided a will dated 3 months ago, leaving the entire Morgan estate to her. He paused, looking at me. Miss Morgan, do you have anything to add before we proceed? I opened my briefcase slowly, feeling my mother's eyes on me. Actually, I do. I pulled out the original will and placed it on the table. I believe this is my grandfather's true last will and testament. My mother's perfectly manicured hand froze halfway to her water glass. What is this? This, I said calmly, is the will my grandfather had properly witnessed and notarized 6 months ago. The one he knew you tried to replace with a forgery. Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Mr. Harrison began reviewing the document. This appears to be in order, he said, and matches the copy in my files exactly. That's impossible, my mother snapped, her composure cracking slightly. Daddy changed his will. He told me himself. I pulled out another document, the forensic analysis of her forged will. Interesting that you use Martinez and Co. for the forgery. They're usually more careful about leaving digital traces. The color drained from my mother's face. I don't know what you're talking about. No, I continued pulling out documents. What about the offshore accounts you set up in the Caymans? The ones you used to hide the money you stole from Dad's company before his accident? Her friends were openly staring now, their discomfort forgotten in the face of a merging scandal. Or perhaps, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, we should discuss what really happened to my father's car the night he died. How dare you? She hissed, but I could see the fear in her eyes now. I laid out the photos, surveillance footage showing her meeting with the mechanic who'd later confessed to tampering with my father's brakes. Bank records proving she paid him through a series of shell companies. Grandfather knew everything, Mother. He spent 20 years gathering evidence, protecting me from you, waiting for this moment. Ladies, Mr. Harrison said quietly to my mother's friends, perhaps he'd like to step out for a moment. They couldn't leave fast enough, no doubt already planning how to spread this gossip through their social circle. My mother's hands were shaking now, her careful facade crumbling. You can't prove any of this. Actually, James spoke up for the first time. We can prove all of it. Your father-in-law was very thorough in his documentation. I pulled out the final piece, my grandfather's letter to her. He knew exactly who you were and what you tried to do. This is your chance, Mother. Accept his real will, or everything comes out. The fraud, the embezzlement, Dad's murder. All of it. She read the letter, her face growing paler with each line. When she finished, she looked up at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Respect, tinged with fear. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you to disappear, I said. Take the trust fund grandfather set up for you. Yes, he did leave you something because he knew appearances matter to you more than anything. Move somewhere far away. Never contest this will, never interfere with the foundation, never try to contact me again. And if I refuse? I nodded to Mr. Harrison, who pulled out another document. Then this evidence goes to the district attorney. I'm sure they'd be very interested in reopening my father's case. The silence in the room was absolute as my mother considered her options. Finally, she stood up, smoothing her designer dress with trembling hands. You're more like your grandfather than I ever realized, she said, her voice bitter. Congratulations. You've won. No, Mother, I corrected her. Grandfather won. He beat you at a game you didn't even know you were playing. She walked out without another word, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. As the door closed behind her, I felt 20 years of tension release from my shoulders. Well done, James said softly. Jonathan would be proud. Mr. Harrison began organizing the paperwork to transfer the estate. The Morgan fortune, the foundation, the family legacy. All of it was now my responsibility. That evening, I sat in my grandfather's study. My study now, looking at his photograph on the desk. He'd known this day would come, had prepared me for it in ways I was only now beginning to understand. Real power, he told me once, isn't about money or control. It's about patience, wisdom, and knowing when to act. My mother left the country a week later, settling into a villa in the south of France. The trust fund would keep her comfortable but not wealthy, exactly as grandfather had planned. The Morgan Foundation continued its work, supporting education and medical research. The family business thrived under my leadership, guided by the principles my grandfather had taught me. And in his study, behind that loose floorboard, I found one last letter, this one addressed to me. My dearest Julia, it read, if you're reading this, then you've done exactly what I knew you would. You've protected our legacy, not through greed or manipulation, but through patience and strength. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become. I know I am. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about winning or losing. It's about justice, served patiently, precisely, and at exactly the right moment.